I was a really great kid, but I was convinced that I wasn't. I was just working with like a lot of pressure that comes from being raised with a single mom and having a completely absent father. Everyone at some point is going to have to sit there and divide what is me, what is society, what is my family, where do they meet, and where can we make those things coexist. Sometimes who we are is defined by how much we've been put through the ringer. I don't want to celebrate myself for the anvil. I want to celebrate myself for my core, for who I am. Celebrating myself rather than my challenges has been kind of like a breath of fresh air.
There's a difference between being other-oriented and people-pleasing, which I think a lot of us grow up thinking that people-pleasing and being selfless and caring about others are the same thing.
No one even thinks about you when you're people-pleasing. Like, you're kind of just an insignificant part of their story and they're able to drift right past you, as when you're turning outward, you're inherently causing and creating change. Turning outward kind of has to do with creating change for others, or at least being there for someone.
It's really, really hard because the people that we should be the most connected to and receive the most support and unconditional love from, sometimes are the people that are the most difficult for us to get along with.
I was able to see a lot of change in my family was creating a gentle but firm boundary.
And trying to show up and really value the good in them, because in reality, we and we get along with 80% of a person, and then it's the other 20% that bothers us, right? And it's the stuff that we don't agree with. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to yet another episode of the Turn Outward podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Smalley. Here at the Turn Outward podcast, we talk about how living altruistically, turning outward, and caring for others leads to the greatest amount of fulfillment in life, is the happiest way to live, and leads to purpose, and is the greatest form of self-care. Thank you for tuning into this episode. I just wanted to give a quick heads up before we get into my interview with my friend Joanna. We kind of had some technical issues, and so the video doesn't really work until about 10 minutes and 6 seconds in. So if you want to watch the video, you can start watching that at 10 minutes and 6 seconds in. And so up until that point, it's kind of just audio, the first little bit of the interview. But thank you so much for being here, and I want to share the message of Turn Outward as much as I possibly can. So if you can follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Music, you can also follow the YouTube channel as well at Turn Outward Podcast. If you can follow the podcast, you can also share it to social media. You can share on my Instagram page. I post clips of some of the interviews that I have. You can share one of those to your story, or you can share one of the links as well. And if you can kind of just follow along with this journey, I would be so very grateful. Anyways, let's get into the interview with Joanna. Today, we have our second ever female guest on the podcast. We have Joanna Salvador. Joanna, how are you?
I'm good, Spencer. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for making time to be here. Joanna has been a friend of mine since 2018, when we were both little babies in college, freshmen in college.
6 years ago.
6 years. Yeah, that's crazy to say. But yeah, I was 20 years old, fresh off of my 2-year mission, and you were 18, straight out of high school. All right.
Maybe even 17, depending on what month we met.
Oh yeah, you were young. Yeah.
I had a couple months before I turned 18 while I was in college, so.
That's right. Yeah.
A long time ago. Jeez.
Because your birthday was in the fall.
September. Yeah. I don't know when we met officially, but I guess.
We met in August, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Very recently.
Oh, geez. Such a baby.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. That's crazy. But yeah, lots of good memories from freshman year. A lot of freshman year drama and all this kind of fun stuff. It's been really cool to keep in touch with Joanna and kind of see how both of us have kind of grown up a little bit since then, and had our own journeys. Joanna's got a really cool story, so I'm really excited for the things that she has to share today. So in that spirit, Joanna, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, your upbringing, all that.
Awesome. So my name is Joanna Salvador, originally Joanna Hildreth, Joanna Castrejón for a while. Not because I got divorced, I just took my mom's maiden name for a while. And so I am from San Diego. My family's from Peru. I grew up with my single mother, which is why I took her name for a little while when I was an adult. And I came out here to BYU. I am finishing up my degree. I have 2 more classes that I'm taking in the summer to get my degree in family studies, family life. And that has just been a joy. I feel like it's like one of the most useful degrees for your everyday life. I mean, like you can always learn things from other degrees that you can apply in your life, but like everything that you learn in this degree will be useful to some extent. And so I also have an emphasis in Latin American studies, and I think that that would probably even like be a bigger passion of mine is the Hispanic Latino community in the US, the diaspora, seeing what that looks like, different expressions of identity. And my family is from the highlands of Peru, meaning that we are indigenous. And that is a huge passion of mine as well, is making sure that my family maintains our practices. And so I would say that in like everything I do, I kind of make sure I'm like in touch with the people who came before me. And I know that some people hear that and they're like, what does that even mean? And it can sound a little crazy, but it's just like making sure that I'm honoring the people who came before me in my decisions. So that's kind of like a huge mantra for my life. And I don't know if there's anything else I can really share. I'm working at a nonprofit right now called Gear Up. It's an amazing program in a lot of states, but really strong in Utah that connects low income high schoolers to college opportunities. So it's really fulfilling work.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, Joanna, helping us get to know you a little bit more.
Yes.
When I first met you, and we were kind of talking about this a little bit, you were young, like we were saying, and you were kind of going through a lot of different things, kind of like with your family, and you've done a lot of self work since then, and really had a lot of, maturing, growing up, and really kind of soul searching and finding. So, kind of talk to us about like what was going on and your journey with that.
Yeah. Um, I feel like I was actually just thinking about this past week. I was kind of like labeling the different eras that I went through musically. Like, Apple dropped its top 100 albums, and a couple of the albums that I listened to when I was like really going through a tough spot were reminding me like, wow, my music taste has changed a lot. So then I was like, how would I label this era of my life, and how would I label this era when I was listening to this kind of music? And then I just started thinking like, there's an era in my life where I would call it like junior senior year of high school, where I would call it I was not doing well at all, but I couldn't tell yet. Like I didn't know that I wasn't doing okay. I thought everything was really fine. And then it wasn't until I got to college and kind of had the freedom to like talk to my dad's side of the family however I wanted and do some exploration. I was a really like locked down teenager, and that comes from my Hispanic heritage. Like as women, a lot of times, and as girls, I guess, you're kind of restricted from engaging with the world around you as much as you would like. And so as a teenager, I like wasn't really allowed to hang out with my friends unless they were from our church. And I wasn't really allowed to like go to football games, and I wasn't allowed to have a phone, and I was just kind of like locked in. So once I got to college and had this whole world open to me, I started realizing that a lot of things that I participated in or did or like thinking patterns were not helpful to me at all. And so once I came to that realization and I started like noticing that there were unhealthy habits in my life, I had to do some serious reflecting. And I say I had to, but it was more like it was not sustainable to not do some serious self work. Like I could no longer continue existing in a point where I like was not improving myself and my thinking patterns. And so actually, Spencer, I don't know if you remember, but there was one day, I think it was like towards the end of our freshman year, I was like having this migraine, and I have like chronic migraines, and so that's normal for me. But I walked up to you, and I think it was someone else at the cafeteria, and I realized I literally could not see out of one eyeball. And that's called a optical migraine, and it's caused by stress. And so I was like literally so stressed out that my brain was having like hallucinations where it completely shut off vision from one side of my eye. And so when I say it wasn't sustainable, I mean like my body was responding to the kind of stress I was experiencing. And I remember telling you like, I can't see you right now. Like I could see you, but I couldn't. And you know, the brain's powerful that way. And so I had to like go home and endure the most painful headache of my life and fall asleep. And then I realized I was like, my brain isn't okay. I don't know how to handle stress. I'm dealing with way too much anxiety, which is just causing this cycle of migraines and stress and migraines and stress and pain and not being able to manage my emotions. And so I went to therapy. Between that day and now, I have seen like four therapists, not because they're bad, but I do good. Like I deal with what I need to deal with in the moment and I stop. And then I pick another one up because I discover that I've like gone through a new thing. And usually they've like moved or like moved forward in their career and I can't keep meeting with the same person. And um, after all of that, I finally feel like I'm okay. And we were just talking about that. I feel like when we met, I was just like a ball of energy that was like kind of hard to like engage with and kind of hard to understand. And now that I'm on the other end of this, and I really do feel like genuinely I'm like self aware, I know what I need to do, I know where my flaws and faults are, and I don't blame myself for them. I feel like I can make myself understood a lot better now. And so on this end of it, I'm proud, but I'm also aware of like the work I need to do. And so um, it's been quite a journey for sure.
Okay. All right. So we've had a little bit of technical difficulties, so we're switching mediums here. We've had Joanna kind of tell a little bit of what she does and then also a little bit of her background. Joanna, we kind of left off talking a little bit of some of those struggles that you're going through freshman year. Um, if you want to share kind of some of the things that were leading to some of those struggles. I know that you kind of had an interesting kind of upbringing with your family and everything. What was that like?
So, with my family, like I stated in my introduction, my parents are divorced, and I think that in and of itself is not uncommon. But I'm also the daughter of an immigrant, which is like any children of immigrant know, it's like a whole new world. It's literally taking a new world and putting it inside the US and trying to make it work. Um, and it's difficult. My cultural upbringing definitely had a lot to do with how I would go on to form relationships and look at myself. Since I am Hispanic, like I said earlier, girls kind of have different expectations, like, and it's either like one or the other. Like either your parents are super egalitarian and are all for your freedom per se, or they really kind of just like lock you down and there's expectations about like not choosing a career and choosing motherhood and being a wife, which there's nothing wrong with that if that's your choosing, right? But when it's something that's like culturally forced upon you, then it can be kind of stifling. Even if you do end up choosing motherhood and being a wife, it's just like the weight of knowing that that's what you need to do. And so those kind of gender norms really played into who I would become, right? And especially since I didn't have my other parent in my corner when I would butt heads with my mom, then that made my teenagehood really turbulent. Like I was a really good kid. I was a great kid, actually. I'll go there and say I was a great kid. Like I just read books all day and did my homework, went to sleep at 9 p.m., woke up on time for school. Like I was a really great kid, but I was convinced that I wasn't because I did want to have a boyfriend. I did want to go out and I didn't have anyone on my side being like, "Oh, maybe she's growing up and she does need to like be able to explore the world around her. Maybe she's growing up and she does need friendships beyond just like her family." And so um that in of itself is just like the context of where I existed, but the content of what I was going through is my dad has been married 7 times now and my mom was number 2. And just knowing that like my dad was so willing to kind of like jump into new relationships while not ever minding at all talking to me and my brothers. And I guess that's a really important detail. It's not just that my parents were divorced, it's that my father was absent. So I saw him in kindergarten. They got divorced when I was like 2 or 3. I saw him in kindergarten. He took us to Disneyland. I saw him in 6th grade. He took us to Universal Studios and the zoo. And then I also saw him at my wedding a couple years ago. But having someone be totally absent, like that will tell you a lot about yourself. not necessarily about yourself, but that will make you view yourself in ways that you shouldn't, right? And so, if you're familiar with attachment styles and you already know, I had all kinds of attachment issues, which impacted the way I thought I was like worthy or unworthy of love. And a lot of it depended on being the perfect daughter and being the perfect person. So I was just working with like a lot of pressure that comes from being raised with a single mom and having a completely absent father and like what that means about me, myself.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I, I was a Spanish speaking missionary, and so I've met a lot of people whose parents are immigrants, and it's like that in and of itself is challenging, right? Because your parents have this culture, right, that they are trying to preserve, right? They have their values, and yet they're coming to this country and raising their kids in a culture that has completely different values and ideals. And so it's like growing up for that kid, it's like they have to reconcile like what's being kind of imposed on them by their parents. Imposed might be kind of like an aggressive word, but like with also trying to like fit in with the culture that they are. And so like with a lot of like first generation kids of immigrants, it's like you see sometimes like they're kind of almost rebelling against the like their parents' culture because they're just trying to fit in as much as possible. So they kind of like push it away almost. And so like trying to find that balance of like how much of my parents' culture do I try and preserve and take on, and how much do I change myself to kind of adjust and fit in. Like that in of itself is challenging. But like on top of that, like you also have like this interesting dynamic with your biological father and all these different things. And you're also a religious minority, right? You're you're also a person of color, right? So
Right.
it's like you had a lot of like these challenging identities that you kind of had to juggle and
Mhm.
make sense of. Um, what was that journey of like you kind of had to wear a lot of hats. What was that like?
Well, it was definitely like a lot of balancing hats. Like it's a lot of trying something on and realizing it wasn't exactly what fit. And so like you're talking about the cultural demands. I grew up in San Diego, which most Hispanics that you're going to meet there are Mexican, and it was like really hard for me to figure out what being Hispanic meant because I wasn't Mexican. And so I lived a little while being like this is what the other Hispanic kids do, and then I was like, wait, they're just Mexican. And it was hard to figure out like what's really me, like combing through that. And everyone has to comb through their things. You know, everyone at some point is gonna have to sit there and divide what is me, what is society, what is my family, where do they meet, and where can we make those things coexist? And it's tiring. Like it's really tiring to have to constantly like be questioning and re-questioning your identity. But it's gratifying. I'll say that. I will say um, this past Mother's Day, I was sitting in church and people were talking about their mothers, and this definitely has to do with like being a woman, right? Um, but I have noticed that sometimes we tend to like celebrate women and especially mothers based off of like how much they went through, which is like good because if you go through a lot of things, you really are strong, right? But it is kind of sad that like as women, as Hispanics, as whatever, sometimes who we are is defined by how much we've been put through the ringer. And so as I went through trying to figure out how to establish a healthy life for myself, it was hard to be like, you know what, I don't want to celebrate myself for all of these really awful things that like bonked me on the head. Like I don't want to celebrate myself for the anvil. I want to celebrate myself for my core, for who I am. And so I'm kind of in this era right now where I'm like people like to kind of like call me a hero because I tell them some really difficult things I've been through in my life and they're like you're amazing, you're so strong. And I don't really want to be strong. Like that sounds silly, right? But I don't want to be strong. I just want to be me. Like I don't want to have to be identified by the things I've gone through, but rather like the traits that have been there the whole time that have carried me through. And so, with all that, sorting through all of these like family things that really affected who I am, I'm still doing that to this day, figuring out like okay, this is Joanna. Like when I'm kind to someone else, that's me. That would have been me regardless of if my parents had gotten divorced or not. And when I'm a good listener to a friend, that's me. And I would have been that. Maybe I wouldn't have, but I'm not going to think about that. I would have been that regardless of if my mom had immigrated from another country or not. And so celebrating myself rather than my challenges has been kind of like a breath of fresh air. And I think you have to do different things at different times. Maybe there will come a time where I really need to focus on like I'm a survivor, but that's not what I want to do right now. Like
Yeah.
I want to exist within myself and be comfortable with that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow, that's I've never heard it quite put that way. That's a really interesting perspective because I think nowadays it's like, especially like social media and influencing, it's almost like you have to have the sort of rite of passage in order to have credibility. Like you have to go through some junk, like some stuff, in order for people to consider you worth listening to. You have to
Right.
have like a certain number of trials in your life. Um, and so I mean, we talked about comparison before, but I think it leads to like this culture of just comparing our hardships to other people and like, oh, I have been through more than this other person. And because I've been through more, I know what's up more than this person. Whereas, like, there are people that go through a lot of terrible things, and the result of that is, maybe not so great. And there
Yeah.
are people that, like, maybe don't go through so many things and they're great amazing people, so like comparing the things that we've gone through like isn't always the best. I think that's really cool how you put that. And it's just like, and at this, like, another thing I got from what you're saying is like it's not really about me anyway. It's not about like tooting my own horn and like celebrating like, ooh, I went through all this, like look at me, and I'm a survivor, like you said. um because like at the end of the day, a thought that came to me was like, if we only go through difficult things in order to kind of put ourselves up on a pedestal and to kind of celebrate ourselves and toot our own horns, if that's like it, then it's kind of like a little baseless.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Yeah, which is I've had conversations on this show where no, it's like you go through those things for other people, so that you can connect with other people, which is what I've found in my life as I've, gone through certain things. It's like, wow, that helped me connect to this person. Whereas before, like, I might have grown up a little privileged and hadn't really experienced very much hardship. But now that I've gone through this, I can like empathize with this person on a deeper level. I really
Yes.
like
Yeah.
that.
There's like you need to recognize like deserve you need to give yourself recognition where it's due, you know? Like that's not to say that if you've gone through struggles, they're meaningless, but it is to say like you need to find meaning in the struggles or the lack thereof, you know? Like you need to make sure that who you're being and the person that you're being throughout all of it is like someone that is first of all like healthy, like able to perform and exist the way they need to, but also someone that's giving back, you know, like participating in their community in whatever way that may be. And you're not just like going through something or through nothing for no reason.
Hmm. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about your kind of personal journey with that. Like, do you feel like you kind of grew up with like being more other oriented, or do you feel like you were kind of that had to be something that developed, or like, I don't know, because you coming from a Hispanic culture, like Hispanic cultures are naturally a little more community oriented, a little more collectivistic. Do you feel like that was something that you kind of grew up with, or was that kind of difficult to develop?
Shoot, that's a good question. So my family, I would say that we're all pretty oriented towards each other, sometimes like not in the best way. Sometimes the demand of making sure that you're doing or saying the right thing for someone else is overwhelming. Um, I don't now that you mention it, I'm like sometimes I don't know how well I was doing to even perceive if I was existing for myself. Like sometimes you really are just doing CPR, right? I'm thinking about like when I was 13 or 14, no, 14 or 15, I was like some serious things had happened in my family and I was just doing CPR. Like I had to just be able to make sure I can wake up and go to school. And I couldn't think a lot about others. I think honestly, my turning outward started more once I got to college. I actually entered college with a major in what was it? Sports medicine, which has been discontinued since. So it's a good thing I dropped it. But um, that like you can say it's turning outwards in a way, and there's nothing wrong like if you do that degree, but um, I would say that it was more just like something that I wanted to do and I enjoyed. And once I got into my major of family studies, where everything is about other people's families and helping them, because a lot of people take that degree and do social work or marriage and family therapy, then I kind of had my eyes a little more open to where I could place myself within the society that we are at and make a difference. Um, so yeah, I guess like once I got to college, once I switched my major, I did also like serve a mission. I totally forgot to mention that, but that was huge in my life. I was in the Utah Provo mission for a year and then in Brazil for 6 months. And so you can't do anything except for think about others when you're on a mission. And so that kind of helps like instill it as a constant heartbeat throughout the rest of your decisions in your life. And I would say that that's where I kind of started looking outwards. Now, my journey for that, oh man, I haven't really had to like think about it. It's just something that I've kind of learned to do, and I probably don't do enough. I mean, can you ever really do enough for the people around you? But I try my best, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a question that came to my mind is like there's a difference between like being other oriented and people pleasing, which
True.
like I think like a lot of us grow up with like with thinking that people pleasing and being selfless and caring about others are the same thing, you know?
Yes,
And so I kind of wanted to like turn the conversation to like, okay, so how do we
explore that.
differentiate between the two of those, you know?
I mean, I'm thinking about people pleasing, and I think about a situation I had happen in my family. Oh man, they probably won't listen to this, so I don't care. Not because they wouldn't listen to the podcast, but like they just wouldn't take the time to listen to it. It was last Christmas, and I really focused on being able to say no. Like that's something I can like award myself for. That did come from like challenges, like struggles of not being able to hold a single personal boundary. Um, I was with my family last Christmas and my little cousin, she saw that I had my long nails on. They're not on right now, but like my acrylic nails. And she's 10 and she's just like obsessed with me. Like we're besties. And so she got little press-ons that were like literally that long. They're huge. She's like, Mom, can you put them on for me? So it's Christmas time and she's running around with nails that are giant and she's like posing like this in all our family pictures. And she's just having a good time. We're sitting together at breakfast. She's sitting next to me, and someone's sitting across the table. And a member of my family walks by and tells the person across the table from us, "Oh, I told her she looks like a stripper with those nails," to a 10-year-old, right? And for me, that was just like not cool. And I think about like who I would have been in the past. I would have either giggled, right? Because it's like awkward, or I would have ignored it. But in that moment, now that I've learned, I'm not gonna please this person. Like I'm gonna establish a boundary. I told him that's incredibly rude. And he kept walking, but the person across the table from me was like, I don't know, I kind of agree. And I told him, doesn't matter if you agree. She's 10 years old. Do we need to compare her to a promiscuous dancer because she's like wearing something she enjoys? And the lesson I got from that is like there is a hierarchy in people pleasing. And it leaves people who are at the bottom, like my 10-year-old cousin, because she's a girl and she's little, she's gonna get kind of screwed over every time. Whereas the person who's at the top, which is this family member who's an adult, who's a man, they're gonna get the pleasing, right? Like the person being pleased is them. And I think that's the difference between people pleasing and turning outward is people pleasing, first of all, is not helpful to anyone. Like when you can't establish a boundary, when you can't say no, when you extend yourself too far beyond your capacities for someone else, it's not going to help them grow in any way. But also, there are people who are going to get kind of screwed over, right? If you don't learn to make sure that you're doing things correctly. I think truly turning outward does require some tough love, right? And I've had to do that. Like I don't mind calling this person in my family rude. And they were embarrassed. The person who I said you don't need to tell that to a 10-year-old, the person I said that to was incredibly embarrassed. He's blushing, right? But now we've learned that there's ways to behave and ways that we shouldn't. And I guess a meme I saw the other day, it said, "Oh, you're a people pleaser. Name 3 people that are pleased with you right now." And I think that's the epitome of like people pleasing. It's like you think you're doing it, but no one even thinks about you when you're people pleasing. Like you're kind of just an insignificant part of their story, and they were able to drift right past you. As when you're turning outward, you're inherently causing and creating change, and that's what ultimately is going to make a more longer lasting difference.
Mm.
In my opinion, I guess you can say what you think.
No, I love that. I think like someone who might listen to the podcast up until now, they might be, well, like if I'm just constantly caring about other people and trying to focus on that rather than my own needs, I'm just going to be a pushover and I'm going to be taken advantage of. And it's like I think there is a balance, right? Because there are going to be times where people are going to need to kind of be put in check.
Yeah.
I talked about this with my friend Chris, who you guys actually have a very similar story. It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Um, but like people that you really care about, you're going to put them in check. You're going to like tell them when they're overstepping, right? And so it's about like caring enough to like step into like the danger zone a little bit in a relationship, right?
This part,
And
yes.
that's like the definition of vulnerability, right? Is
Yeah.
like being willing to like, you know, take some backlash for
Mhm.
doing something, right? Because when you're vulnerable, people think of vulnerability as like disclosing something typically.
Right.
When you're like disclosing something, you're like putting a very vulnerable part of yourself out there,
Mhm.
and like that could be used against you, or that could, it could come back to bite. So like the
Mhm.
definition of vulnerability is being willing to put yourself out there and like to take a risk
Yeah.
basically. And so
Yeah.
sometimes in relationships we have to be willing to take risks. As someone who has worked in counseling, worked in therapy, I know a lot of couples where it's just like we just gotta keep this quiet, like we just don't bring this up, we just don't talk about this because it's going to stir something up if we breach this specific topic, right?
Yeah.
And like in valuable relationships and intimate relationships, there needs to be, kind of stepping out into the danger zone, being willing to take those risks. That doesn't mean that you have to come across like in antagonizing ways. Like, the it's definitely true that how you communicate and how you put someone in check, like that
Yeah.
is super important,
You need to do
right?
it right.
Because if you
Yeah.
do it the wrong way, then yeah, it's going to trigger someone and then it's
Yeah.
going to turn into a conflict.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been on that end too, where I said things probably the way I shouldn't have, and I can accept that I'm wrong for I'm wrong
Mhm.
for that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think especially with like family members, right? Like big extended families and all that. Sometimes we can be very blunt, like in the way that we correct them. Because like with
Definitely.
family, it's almost like we trust them more to
Mhm.
not react poorly sometimes to our bluntness. But
Yeah.
like that's not always the case.
Yeah.
We kind of make assumptions sometimes.
I
So
think that like I'm married. That's another thing I forgot to mention. Probably the most like important thing in my life. Like my marriage takes up every moment of my life. I'm always texting my husband. When he comes home, we spend all of our time together. And we were able to set up a relationship. Honestly, the reason I knew he was the one, right? People ask me that all the time, is because we would come up on conflict, which is normal in every relationship. So when we were dating, like something would come up and we would really kind of get on each other's nerves about how different we felt about it. And we were able to talk to each other about it without being nasty or mean or overly blunt, you know? And that was what clued me in. Like, hey, I have this great person that I like. I enjoy spending all my time with him. We have the bond that we need, and also we can solve every single issue. But then I think about relationships in my family where we don't have that, where from the beginning our relationship and our communication has always been kind of like stabbing at each other, and it's hard to even see like if the relationship can continue. Like especially with my extended family, sometimes I'm like, I love you guys. I don't know if I can keep talking to you guys. Like it's not working the way it needs to. And so to anyone out there listening that's thinking about a new relationship they need to start, that's a pattern I would definitely make sure you establish is the gentle startup when you do need to kind of fix some behavior, and the humility to listen when you need to have your behavior changed. Because I mean, if you're not humble enough to listen, then there's just nowhere you can go. And again, like we were saying, turning outward kind of has to do with creating change for others, or at least being there for someone. And you need to be able to be flexible in order to be that person, or else you're just kind of sitting in your pot of not doing anything and never changing anything, and you're just stuck in your life, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, no, relationships are messy. And I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting because us being members of the church, we grew up in a culture where families are very heavily emphasized, where it's like family, family, family. It's the most important thing. You know, there's like a kind of not pressure. Well, there's like influence to like, starting a family is like the greatest thing you'll ever do, right? And like so there's kind of like this kind of push or like gentle nudge to like go and start dating and to get married and to have kids and all these things.
Kind of all
But
encompassing.
like it's really interesting like working as a therapist and counselor now because it's like a lot of people that I meet with like their number one cause of like headache and drama and heartache and just like suffering in their life is often brought about by family,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
and and so it's like it's really really hard because the people that we should be the most connected to and receive the most support and unconditional love from like sometimes are like the people that are the most difficult for us to like get along with
Yeah.
and um and so like if there's someone listening to the podcast it's like that kind of feels that way like my family's like the greatest cause of like my headaches and my heartaches and all that.
Yeah, girl.
What are maybe like some tips you've mentioned a couple so far but like
Yeah.
navigating tricky family relationships?
Mhm. Listen, I hate to say it, I really do, but I'm a huge fan of I don't want to call it no contact because that's like a buzzword, but I'm a huge fan of stepping away when you need to step away. Now, obviously, like the goal, I mean, I have a degree in family relationships, and so the goal is to maintain healthy relationships when you can, but sometimes you need to step away, and maybe not permanently, but in my own family, I was starting to realize that some members of my family, their behavior was not beneficial, not even beneficial, because it's not like I have anything to win, but like not healthy. I hate to use that word a lot, but it wasn't healthy for anyone involved. And I took a lot of time to try and correct it. Like I tried to communicate when people were saying, I don't know, in my family, a lot of it is like racist things outside of Peruvians. And I tried to fix that, and I tried to arrange it. And the worst thing is a lot of the racism in my family is towards Mexicans for no reason. There's no logical reason, but my husband's Mexican. So once I got married, it made me extremely uncomfortable to hear people say things about other Hispanics. And I tried to say things about how we shouldn't be judging people, because that's a pretty big problem in my family as well, is like judging others and making other people's business, like people who are just living their lives, our business. I really genuinely tried to make sure that that wasn't occurring. But it got to a point where I'm like, you know what? This isn't stopping. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's not for lack of trying either. And so I have taken a step back from a lot of family members, extended family, and been like, you know what? This is just not working. And that's okay. Maybe we'll check back in a while. But for now, I'm gonna make sure that I'm good. My closest family's good, and continue to live my life. So that's one tip. Now, again, reserve that for extreme measures. Another, I guess, piece of advice I would give for people who are kind of feeling that way, like their family's their biggest headache. I have been there. I have been there. Um, I guess, I don't know. A lot of my story has been like creating my own kind of family, like not just in my husband, but like in my friendships, having people around me who count as family for me. Um, Being okay with saying no to things. I know a lot of my tips for people are like stand up for yourself, which is, I think a lot of other people, if you were to ask someone else their tips for like how to coexist with their family or like to be patient, but um if you need that, then do that. But that's like not where I've really been able to resolve my issues is I've been able to resolve my issues by communicating with my family and saying no every once in a while. Like I said, I was kind of like locked in. I felt like Rapunzel for a lot of my teenagehood. I came home for my first Thanksgiving break after going to college, and my mom was like, "You need to be home by 10." And I had friends that I wanted to visit, and I had like people I wanted to hang out with because I had just been away for college for a long time. And that was the first time I really ever was like pushing back on my mom. I told her, "Mom, I've been out till like 3 in the morning with friends in college, and you're one of those friends in our little friend group." And I had to be like, "Mom, like, I'm not Rapunzel anymore. Like, you can't keep me in this tower. I know it's 10. I know it's late, but I also know I'm okay. I'm not gonna be messing around with the wrong things or the wrong people, and I need to at least in my mind have the freedom." And so once I was able to set a boundary, say no, my mom actually apologized to me for Christmas break. She came up to me and she's like, "I'm so sorry. I did not let you grow up." And that's when I was able to see a lot of change in my family was creating a gentle but firm boundary. And so those are advice I would give people. If you're already doing that, I don't know, Spencer, maybe you can help them out more. But
Yeah.
that's what I would tell people.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think for me, it's been, I like what you said about like creating your own kind of family culture. And the thought that came to my mind is be the change that you wish to see.
Mhm.
Because especially with my mom's side of the family, I haven't been like, I've seen my cousins like twice a year, maybe 3 times a year at like family gatherings. And then other than that, we don't like really hang out or see each other very much, which a lot of people are more close with their cousins.
Mhm.
And I think that's awesome. And I'm kind of jealous of that. But there has been like some family drama, maybe between my mom and like my uncles and all that. Um, that's kind of like affected us as kids. And so for me, like when I do go see them, even though it's not very often, I try and take advantage of those times to
Mhm.
like just show as much love and genuineness. Is it genuineness or genuinity? To be as genuine as I can.
There you go.
Forgot the specific word for that. But yeah, to just be the change that I wish to see in my
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
Um and just like keep it, I don't know, be genuinely interested in them. Because I have like some family members that just like to talk and kind of toot their own horn and talk about themselves. And if that's what they want to do, like I listen, you know? And my uncle knows a lot about knives and he can talk to you about knives for like,
Wow.
you know, half an hour to an hour. And, indulging in him a little bit that, oh, like, what do you think about it? I'm not like a big knife guy, but, I'll listen to that. And I don't know, just like trying to show up and really value the good in them because I think so much there's like in reality, like we like and we get along with like 80% of a person, but then it's like the other 20% that like bothers us,
Mhm.
right? And it's like the stuff that we don't agree with.
Yeah.
And I can relate to what you said also about your family because I had two Mexican roommates in my last place I lived with in Provo. It's kind of like the Latino culture to kind of tease,
Yeah.
like in Spanish they have nicknames like
Yeah.
gorda,
It's
you know,
super, yeah.
yeah, where they
I'm,
kind of like, they're a little more blunt and they tease a lot
yeah.
more with their humor.
I know. I'm not like super comfortable with that all the time. Like
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest rifts in my family has been because one family member took a nickname way too far. Well, a couple family members took a nickname like way too far, and just that really deeply impacted the relationship. And some people say like learn to be resilient in the face of that. You know what? Fine. Like for you guys who already have your patterns established, I'll be resilient with you. But with my babies, I'm not gonna make a whole nickname for them that surrounds how they look, how much they weigh. Like I'm I'm good on that. And that's what exactly what you're saying. Like be the change you want to see. I want to see that change. Some of the things that my family members say are ruthless, and I'm not gonna be that way. And that's it. And the word that we use in family studies is a transitional character, is being someone who is the difference in your family. Like I don't know if you've seen Coco,
Hmm.
Coco, where what is his name? Miguel? Is it Miguel? I think so. What the main character, the little boy.
I think so, yeah.
He's the one who's like willing to play music, right? And he's the one that's causing the transition in his family. And he kind of ruffles a few feathers. Like people get pretty mad at him because he plays music, or people get pretty mad at him because he talks about things that they don't want to talk about. But that's ultimately what leads to their family being more unified and stronger in the end, is being the transitional character. And so it starts with like being the change you want to see. If you can't force the change onto your family, save it in your mind for the future. Like
Yeah.
the family you'll create for yourself.
The thought that occurred to me is like you kind of have to be willing to take it for a little bit. Like the things like the chisme and like
Mhm.
or that means gossip in Spanish, but like the things that maybe family members say about you or that certain people say about you, kind of have to be willing to like take it and just continue kind of take it with grace, because I think of the example of like Christ. Like people said a lot of terrible things about Christ,
Yes.
and he wasn't like arguing with them over it. He was just kind of like, okay, well, I'm gonna keep like doing my work and doing my ministry and keep like blessing and helping other people and being the best I can be. And I think that's like the attitude that we have to have, is like I'm just gonna keep doing my thing and like doing my best, and over time I'm gonna trust that they're gonna recognize that. And I've definitely seen that with family members. It's like, the things that I used to do as a kid that were super annoying, or when I wasn't super nice to my cousins, or when there was a lot of family drama, as I keep trying to put my best foot forward, it's like those judgments slowly kind of fade out and they start to recognize like, oh, Spencer's like doing good things and
Oh,
Spencer's grown up a lot. And so
yes.
it's almost like a prove them wrong like
Yes.
mentality, but it's like at the
And
same time you don't want like pettiness to be your
don't want
motivation. It's
that,
like
that
you
humble.
do want like love to be your ultimate motivation, but it's kind of similar.
Yeah. I think I got in a lot of fights with my family. You'll hear that. The last big fight I had with someone other than my immediate family was because there were a couple family members. We all got together in Peru for my grandpa's funeral. They were like tooting their own horn about how physical discipline is the best way to teach a child how to behave. And they were kind of like boasting about, yeah, we smacked our kid in the middle of the grocery store. Yeah, we would grab them by the ear while we were out in public. And I know those kids, the kids that were on the receiving end, it's traumatic for them. Like the stories of like bleeding out of their head because of the way that their parents treated them. That's not cool. And so I was like, my eyes like twitching at that point while I'm listening to them toot their own horn at the dinner table in front of all of our extended family. Like, yeah, like you need to beat your kids. Like that's how you get it. I'm like going insane. I'm like scratching my neck. Ultimately, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna say something. I have a degree in family relationships. There is no benefit that has ever been shown from hitting your child as discipline. Now, some people overinflate the negative effects, but there is for sure not a single benefit, not even one, to hitting a child as a form of discipline. And the response to that was like you're saying, like people kind of just have to, you have to take how people see you. Like if they see you as something bad, you kind of just have to sit with that for a while. Because they were telling me, you think you're so smart because you have a degree. You think that you're so inflated. I can tell that you think you're better than us, which I do not. I've never thought that. I've never thought that I'm better than you. But I kind of just had to let them be like, okay, if that is how you feel about me, that's just how you're going to have to feel about me. It's not going to change how I feel about myself. And I'm willing to sit with that. Now, I finally do have my degree. And you know what? if they want to feel that way, they can. But my mom came up to me that night and said, "I'm proud of you for speaking up." And
Mm.
my aunt came up to me that night and she said, "You can't change a burro's mind." And a burro's like a donkey that's known to be stubborn. And so she says, "You can't change their mind." And so I know how the people who really matter feel about me. I'm willing to sit with the fact that you think I'm prideful or that you think I'm better than everyone. Despite the fact that I know it's not true, I'm not going to fight you on that. And I'm okay with you believing that. And I know who I am. And there you go. And now the problem is if you don't know who you are. Like if you haven't done the work to really like understand yourself, then when someone says something like that, that can be really painful. But if you've done the work, then it's okay. Like, okay, feel that way. Maybe they'll never
Mhm.
change their mind. Maybe they will. And I'm okay either way.
Yeah, really good stuff.
I think it's really important to like to choose your battles,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like obviously there are certain things that you're gonna need to like
Yeah.
you're gonna need to like draw the line and draw boundaries and step in. But I think also like with my family, there's been a lot of things I'm just like I can let that go, even though like it's like frustrating and annoying. It's like yeah, I can probably
Mm-hmm.
like let that go. And so like knowing the difference too, and then like we're also talking about like when you do step in and like correct, it's like um, I've also learned a lot about this as like a marriage counselor. Is like sometimes we have like a very direct approach of like identifying the problem, calling it out very bluntly and explicitly, and sometimes like a more like
Yeah,
sometimes like you do kind of have to beat around the bush
yeah,
because like coming in very aggressively with like family members, it's
right.
like if someone feels like attacked very like explicitly and bluntly, then they're going to react
Mm-hmm.
as if they've been attacked and get defensive. Because like I mean, you and I we've learned about cognitive dissonance, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Definitely.
like people will do whatever it takes
Mm.
to justify their beliefs.
First of all, to have faith that if you do your part, things will work out for good. Like that is kind of hard to believe, especially if anyone out there comes from a background like my own, where so much does kind of just like hit the fan, and you're just sometimes it feels like you're just on your own as you hold steady to the things that are right, and you're constantly doing the work and revision of reviewing yourself and checking yourself and making sure that you're okay. Things will smoothen out. Like you'll find your people, you'll find your place, and you'll find yourself in a way that will allow you to engage with the world around you. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. It makes sense in my head, but have faith that it'll work out because it will. And you're never alone. Like that was a really hard lesson for me to learn. I didn't feel like I could trust a lot of people around me or that they were reliable, but as I found people in my life who were willing to support me, then I was able to be strong enough to make the changes I needed in my own life. So keep that in mind, and I'm sure that things will work out the way they're supposed to.
Man, really good stuff, Joanna. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and thank you again for your time. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for having me, Spencer. It's been nice to come on here and share a little bit. I could be a little rambly, but that's okay. Whatever needs to stand out will stand out. So